All right, John, you're ready to go ahead.
Okay, I did the A2 plus B2 equals C2, which I made, since 3 and 7 were the legs, I made that A and B. So it was 3 squared plus 7 squared equals x squared. So it would be 9 plus 49 equals x squared. And that got me 58, so that's converted it to 7.6.
Thank you. Ivy, tell us, do you agree or disagree? Yeah, very good. So you get approximately 7.6. You could have also rounded that to 7.62. And I wouldn't recommend it, but you could have also rounded to 8. The reason I do not recommend rounding to 8 is because you might mistake it for a Pythagorean triple if you round it to 8. And anytime you round, it's not a Pythagorean triple.
That's 7.6.
All right, what questions do you have for us on the bell ringer? You can go ahead and put your bell ringer away. I want to tell you before we get started, just so I don't forget, you have a homework assignment on quizzes tonight. So you'll need to make sure and do that. Show your work on paper, turn it in tomorrow. But you'll need to have that completed when you come to class tomorrow. It should already be posted on Google Classroom. It was supposed to post this morning at 8, but I will check it and make sure after class today that you have an assignment posted on the quiz is for after school today. All right, let's go ahead and close our Chromebooks and let's get started on 10.2 notes. Looks like nothing's going to work this morning. All right, 10.2, special right triangles. It says students will be able to find side lengths and special right triangles. So what we're going to do is, first, what I need you to do is find the length of the hypotenuse of the 45, 45, 90 triangle. Okay, so how I know this is a 45, 45, 90 triangle is because it's a right triangle, and these two sides are both 1, so that makes them congruent. That makes this an isosceles triangle. Well, if it's 90 and it's isosceles, what does that tell you about these two angles? You're combining isosceles triangles all the way back from like chapter 4 or 5. If you have an isosceles triangle, then what do you know about the angles?
The same.
Why? Because the sides are the same? Yeah, if the sides are the same, the angles are the same. So that's base angles theorem. So if these two sides are both 1, what do we know about these two angles? They're both the same. All right, so Kyle, if this is a right triangle and those two are isosceles triangles, what's going to be the measure of each of those angles?
45.
45. So they're each going to be 45. So anytime you know you have a 45, 45, 90 triangle, you know that these two segments are going to be congruent. Okay? Or anytime you know that these two segments are congruent, you know it's going to be 45, 45, 90. Okay, so it goes both ways. All right, it says find the length of the hypotenuse of the 45, 45, 90 triangle, and they're both 1. All Alright, so it's a right triangle, so we're gonna use Pythagorean theorem. Alright, Colton, give me the Pythagorean theorem, please. If you can't remember it, look at your bell ringer or look at your 10.1 notes. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Okay. Now, I need to figure out which side is the hypotenuse. Ivy, which side would be the hypotenuse? Yeah, this one here. How do I know that side's my hypotenuse? Because it's not the legs, yeah, John?
Because it's across from 90 degrees.
It's across from the 90-degree angle. So that's how you know what side's the hypotenuse. It's across from the 90-degree angle. And which of these letters represents the hypotenuse, Ivy? C. So this is my C. Okay? This is my A and my B. That's my C. So I do 1 squared plus 1 squared equals C squared. All right. Aiden, what's 1 squared?
1.
So I have 1 plus 1 equals C squared. And now the toughest question ever asked in math. Ben, what's 1 plus 1? 2. So I get 2 equals C squared. Now, how do I get rid of that squared right there, Caden?
You get the square root of 2.
Yeah, you do the square root of 2. And I want the exact answer. We're no longer going to give our answer in decimals. We're going to do the exact. If you have one of those small calculators, you're in for a treat. If not, those big ones don't really do it. To simplify a square root, you see if there's any factors of that's a perfect square. For instance, if I was doing the square root of 8, I could break that up into the square root of 4 times the square root of 2, because 4 times 2 is 8. Well, the square root of 4 is 2, so you get 2 square roots of 2. That's a concept all the way back from algebra. Okay, well, 2 is a prime number, so you just have 1 times 2, and neither of those are a perfect square, so we just leave our answer as the square root of 2. So C equals the square root of 2. C equals the square root of 2. So the hypotenuse is the square root of 2. So if you have a 45, 45, 90 triangle, and you have 1, 1, square root of 2, or if you have 1 and 1, then the hypotenuse is automatically square root of 2. Okay. All right, so let's apply that to what we did in chapter 9. What do you notice about all 3 of these triangles?
They all got lines. And all got lines.
What do the lines mean?
They're congruent. Sides are congruent.
The sides are congruent. What type of, if they have 2 sides congruent, so here's your triangle. These 2 sides are congruent. It's a right angle. What type of triangle is this, Rayleigh? Isosceles. It's an isosceles right triangle. Hayden, what type of triangle is this one?
Same thing.
Same thing. Isosceles right triangle. And what about this one here, Kyle? What type of triangle would this be? Isosceles, and it's a right. They're all 3 the same type of triangle. Now, they're not congruent. However, what do I know about these 2 angles here? What are these 2 angles going to be, Ivy? What measure? So you got a 45, 45, 90 triangle. Then what are these 2 angles in this middle triangle going to be? What are these 2 angles going to be? What's the measure of them? So what, if they're the same, what's it going to be? What number? 45. So 45, 45, 90. And John, what about this one here? What are these 2 angles going to be? 45. All 3 triangles have a 45, 45, 90. They all 3 have the same 3 angles. Now, they're not the same size, so they can't be congruent. Is there something else we've talked about previously? We just took a test over that they are?
Something 3.
They are similar, which means their sides are proportional. Okay, so proportional means they are all multiplied by the same scale factor. So for instance, this triangle here is 1, 1, square root of 2. We just did that, correct? What if this side right here is 2? Rayleigh, what would this side here be? 2. All right, let's get our head, please. All right, so what would my scale factor be from this triangle to that triangle, Colton? What did I multiply? What would I have to multiply this by to get this? You'd have to multiply it by 2. Well, if I multiply this side by 2, what would I have to multiply this side by? The same thing. What would I have to multiply this side by? Scale factor means you multiply all the sides by the same. I multiply this side by 2, and I multiply this side by 2. So am I going to multiply this side by? You're going to multiply it by 2. So to get your hypotenuse, you would just do 2 times the square root of 2. Okay? All right. What if this side here was 8? And I'm going from this one to this one. I'm going from the little one to the big one. If this side's 8, Ben, what would I have to multiply this 1 by to get 8? You'd have to multiply it by 8. So Ben, if my scale factor is 8, what am I going to multiply this side by to get this missing side? I'm going to multiply it by 8. And what's 1 times 8? And what do you think I'm going to multiply this side by, Aiden?
8.
To get my new hypotenuse, which is 8 times the square root of 2. Okay, let me do another one. This is a 45, 45, 90 triangle. And this side right here is 6. John, you think you know what the hypotenuse is going to be? Have you noticed anything? Have you noticed a pattern? Like here I saw the 2 legs was 2 and the hypotenuse was 2 times the square root of 2. Here the legs were 1 and the hypotenuse is the square root of 2. Here the legs were 8 and your hypotenuse is 8 times the square root of 2.
Should be 6 times the square root of 2.
Perfect. Did you have to do any actual like math or using, well you did math, but did you actually have to like do any actual work?
No, not really.
No, you just had to multiply that side leg by the square root of 2. And that's what's so special about a 45, 45, 90 triangle. You don't have to sit there and go through and use the Pythagorean theorem every single time. You just take your legs and multiply it by the square root of 2 and you're done. Okay. All right, let's remember to keep our heads up. All right, so what the 45, 45, 90 triangle theorem says is, in a 45, 45, 90 triangle, the hypotenuse is, notice you got to fill in the blank, the square root of 2 times as long as each leg. In a 45, 45, 90 triangle. So you have to make sure it's a 45, 45, 90 triangle. The way to do that, they either give you the 45 degrees or they tell you that it's isosceles by telling you that the sides are the same. So it says, in a 45, 45, 90 triangle, the hypotenuse is the square root of 2 times as long as each leg. Okay? And then you have that triangle, and then you have a formula that you need to write down right underneath that triangle. The hypotenuse equals the leg times the square root of 2. The hypotenuse equals the leg times the square root of 2. And we're going to use that formula to find missing side lengths. You just have to make sure and determine which one's the hypotenuse and which one's the leg. It doesn't matter which leg you use because the legs are going to always be the same. All right, let's do the first example. It says find the value of x. Write your answer in simplest form. Simplest form means exact. It means do not give me a decimal. Do not round it to a decimal because the square root of 2 is an irrational number, and math teachers like your answers to be exact. So don't do a decimal. All right, so here's my 90-degree angle, and this angle is 45, so that automatically makes this angle 45. So this is a 45, 45, 90 triangle. That makes these two sides congruent, and it makes this side the hypotenuse. And the two congruent sides would be my legs. Okay. All right, so first thing you need to do is write down the formula. The hypotenuse equals the leg times the square root of 2. And now you just plug in for the hypotenuse and the leg. The hypotenuse is x, so I do x equals, the leg is 8, so 8 times the square root of 2. So x equals 8 times the square root of 2. Now, pretty much you're just going to treat the square root of 2 like it's a variable. The only time you're actually going to have to do some math is if you're multiplying a radical times a radical. Then you would have to do stuff. But you can't do an integer times a radical. Well, you can, but you don't actually do anything with it. So your answer is just x equals 8 times the square root of 2.
Wow.
Pretty much you're going to treat these radicals like a variable. The only time that you would actually do some math there is if you had the square root of 2 times the square root of 6. Well, 6 times 2 is 12, so you do the square root of 12. Okay. Now you can simplify that into 4 times 3, the square root of 4 times the square root of 3. And the square root of 4 is 2, so 2 square roots of 3. Like I said, that's an algebra concept. We don't actually go over that because already know. But most of ours are going to be very, very simple. All right, let's do one together. Find the value of x, write your answer in simplest form. First thing you need to do is fill in that 5 square roots of 2. So I can tell this is a 45, 45, 90 triangle because these two sides are both x, so that makes them congruent. Okay. So which side would be considered my hypotenuse, Kyle?
5, 10.
Yeah, 5 times the square root of 2. So that's my hypotenuse. Okay. Next thing you need to do is write down the formula. Kaden, what's the formula again?
It's leg times 2, square root of 2.
Okay, so the hypotenuse equals the leg times the square root of 2. Okay. Ben, what am I going to plug in for the hypotenuse? Well, what did we say? Which side's the hypotenuse? The x or the 5 square roots of 2? The 5 square roots of 2. So we plug in 5 square roots of 2 for the hypotenuse. What am I going to plug in for the leg, Ivy? X. So it's x times the square root of 2. Now I'm trying to get x by itself. And remember, you do the opposite. Adding and subtracting are opposites, and multiplying and dividing are opposites. Well, this is x times the square root of 2. So how am I going to get rid of the square root of 2? What am I going to do? Perfect. You're going to divide by the square root of 2 on both sides. Okay, so I divide this side by the square root of 2, and I divide this one by the square root of 2. Well, I remember all the way back from Algebra 1 that they said pretty much anything divided by itself is 1, so it cancels out. So what happens when you divide the square root of 2 by the square root of 2? It cancels out. So that over there cancels out, so we just have x by itself.
Well, x is 5.
And what happens over here? What happens, Kaden, what happens to these two square roots of 2?
Cancels out.
And what do you get x equals? 5. Perfect. Now, does it make sense that if these two legs are 5, does it make sense that the hypotenuse would be 5 times the square root of 2? Because didn't we just do that earlier? We just took the leg and multiplied it by the square root of 2. All right, now that we've done 2, what questions do you have for me so far? let's do the next one. Find the value of the variable, write your answer in simplest form. So first thing I need you to do is fill in that 2 square roots of 2 on that side over there that's missing. Okay. So first thing, which side is the hypotenuse? Rayleigh, which side would be the hypotenuse? The x, or the square root of 2? Yeah, 2 times the square root of 2 would be my hypotenuse. Okay, and these would be my legs. Now start with the formula. Kyle, what's the formula again?
Height equals leg times square root of 2.
Perfect. And what am I going to plug in for the hypotenuse, Ivy? And what am I going to plug in for the leg, Colton? X, perfect. Times the square root of 2. All right, now, Aiden, what am I going to do next?
Divide by square root of 2.
And Ben, these over here cancel. What's 2 square roots of 2 divided by the square root of 2? It's just 2. Now, what questions do you have for me? Alright, this next one you're going to work out with your partner, but first you need to fill in the missing thingamabobs. Each of those sides are each the square root of 2 and the square root of 2. And it says write your answer in simplest form. Alright, so once you get that ready to go, you can go ahead and turn and work with your partner. Kyle, can I get you to come sit right here? And Rayleigh, will you turn around and work with them? John, can I get you to come sit up here with Ivy? And Katie, can I get you to come sit up beside Ben? And Aiden, you'll just turn around and work with them too. Alright, so work this one out with your partner.
Which one are we doing?
The first guided practice. It's right there on the, oh, it must have flipped. Type that in your calculator and tell me what you get. No. You didn't get out of the radical. Pickler again. You wrote square root of 2. Attention please, on this first one, you should have gotten y equals 2, and let me show you why. Your hypotenuse equals your leg times the square root of 2. Well, your hypotenuse is y, and your leg is the square root of 2, so it's square root of 2 times square root of 2. Well, if you have a radical times a radical, you just multiply the numbers on the inside. 2 times 2 is 4, so it's the square root of 4. And the square root of 4 is 2. Now, really, the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is the same thing as the square root of 2 squared. And a radical and a square undo each other. So like these cancel each other out, so all you're left with is 2. And this works with any number. So for instance, if you have the square root of 3 times the square root of 3, that's just 3. The square root of 10 times the square root of 10 is just 10. So you don't even really have to, do any calculations. Just know that if you do a radical times itself, you just have to get rid of the radical. If you had the square root of 1,234 times the square root of 1,234, that's just going to equal 1,234. All right, let's do the next one. Or do the next one with your partner. You need to fill in the missing sides and then work it out together. Let's go ahead and turn and go back to your original seats. So for this one here, we should have gotten x equals 7 times the square root of 2. 7 times the square root of 2. Does anyone have any questions, or would anyone like me to see, or would anyone like to see me work this one out? Alright, let's go on. Chunk 2. Triangle theorem. It says in a 30, 60, 90 triangle, the hypotenuse is twice as long as the shorter leg, and the longer leg is the square root of 3 times as long as the shorter leg. Okay, so you'll need to fill those in chunk 2 under the 30, 60, 90 triangle theorem. And then also notice that your sides are missing. So you'll need to fill those in as well on your triangle. If the short side is x, the hypotenuse is 2 times x, and then the longer leg is x times the square root of 3. Now, my question to you is, how can you tell which one's the short side and which one's the long side? It's obviously which one's the hypotenuse. It's opposite the 90-degree angle. But how are you going to be able to tell which one's the short side and which one's the long side out of these two sides here? How can you tell? What if it's not drawn to scale? Look at the angle measures. Didn't we just have a test over that last week? The bigger side is opposite the bigger angle. So you got 60 and 30. Which one's bigger, 60 or 30? 60 is bigger, so the side opposite of it will be the longer side. Okay? So that's how you tell which one's the longer side. It's the one opposite the 60. All right, so here's the two formulas we're going to be using. The hypotenuse, you do the shorter leg times 2. And to find the longer leg, you do the shorter leg times the square root of 3. Okay, so fill in those two formulas. Yep, you need to fill in the formulas, like the actual, like that right there. Because it won't always be x. So the hypotenuse is the shorter leg times 2. And the longer leg is the shorter leg times the square root of 3. Alright, so this one's a little bit more complicated. It says find the values of x and y. Write your answer in simplest form. Okay? So first thing I would do is figure out which one's the hypotenuse, which one's the shorter, and which one's the longer leg. So here's my 90-degree angle, so that right there is my hypotenuse. So Y would be my hypotenuse. And then here's the 30-degree angle. Since it's the smallest angle, the side opposite is the smallest side. So this right here, X would be my short side. And that makes 9 my long side. Okay. Now, start with your formulas. If you do hypotenuse first, you're going to get that the hypotenuse equals the short side times 2. Well, I don't know what the short side is yet. I need to find the short side. So, I'm going to have to use the other formula first. The other formula says the long leg equals the short leg times the square root of 3. So write that formula. The long leg equals the short leg times the square root of 3. Well, my long leg is 9. My short leg is x. So 9 equals x times the square root of 3. Okay. Now, to solve for x, we're going to do the same thing we did previously, and I would divide both sides by the square root of 3. Ooh, here there's no square root of 3 up here for it to cancel. So I've got to work with this. Now, remember how I told you earlier? Now, what's wrong with this radical is what's wrong with this answer, it has a radical in the denominator. You can't have a radical in your denominator. You can have one in your numerator, but not your denominator. So I need to multiply this by a number to get rid of the radical. Well, remember me showing you earlier, like the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is
At this time, the seniors will be returning back to class. Thank you.
Do you know how I told you earlier the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is 2? Okay, we're going to use that method to simplify this. The square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is just 3. So I'm going to multiply that radical by the square root of 3. So I'm going to multiply that bottom denominator by the square root of 3. Well, to keep this fraction even, I'm tipping the scales, so to make them even, I've got to do the same thing to the top. So I multiply the top by the square root of 3 as well. Okay, so 9 times the square root of 3 is just 9 square roots of 3. And the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is just positive 3. And these right here cancel. So this equals x. Okay. Now the only thing you got to see is if you can reduce the 9 over 3. What's 9 divided by 3? Anyone know that answer? 9 divided by 3? All the way back to 3rd grade? It's 3. So my final answer is 3 times the square root of 3 equals x. 3 times the square root of 3 equals x. Okay, so that means my short side, we're not finished, but we got to find x and y. Okay, so x is 3 square roots of 3, so my short side is 3 square roots of 3. So now we got to find the hypotenuse. Well, it says my hypotenuse equals the short side times 2. Okay. Well, my hypotenuse is y, and my short side is 3 square roots of 3 times 2. Now, if this was a variable and it said 3x times 2, what would that equal, 3x times 2? Okay, that one's a little too difficult. What if my short side was 3? And so I had to do 3 times 2. What's 3 times 2? 6. So what's 3x times 2? If 3 times 2 is 6, what's 3x times 2? 6x. So if you're treating this right here like a variable, what's 3 square roots of 3 times 2?
6 times 6.
treat the radical like it's a variable. You just tag it onto your answer. And so just like we did, 3 times 2 is 6, 3x times 2 is 6x, 3 square roots of 3 times 2 would be 6 square roots of 3. Okay. Alright, like I said, this one's a little bit more complicated, so before we ask questions, let's do another one together. And then we'll ask questions. Find the value of the variable, write your answer in simplest form. Okay, so first you need to fill in the x and the square root of 3. Alright, then you need to decide, what do they give you? The short side, the long side, or the hypotenuse? This x right here, would you say that that's the short side, the long side, or the hypotenuse, Kyle?
The long side,
How did you know?
because 60 is the bigger number.
Yep, and what about the square root of 3? What's that one? Is that the short side or the hypotenuse?
Short side.
Perfect. Alright, so which formula would I use, Aiden?
You use the x minus root 3.
Well, but which formula? Those two formulas. Which one do I use? The longer leg, and what does it say the longer leg equals? On the formula.
The long leg, short leg times the square root of 3.
Okay, so long leg equals short leg times the square root of 3. What am I going to plug in for the long leg then? Equals the short leg. Kagan, what am I going to plug in for the short leg?
You're going to plug in the short leg times 2. It'd be,
No, look here. What
oh,
we have our formula. Short leg times the square root of 3. Well, what's the length of the short leg?
It'd be square root of 3.
So I have the square root of 3 times the square root of 3. John, what's the square root of 3 times the square root of 3? It's just 3, so x equals 3. Well, if they were to ask you for the hypotenuse, it says you just take the short leg and multiply it by 2, so it would just be 2 square roots of 3, 2 times square root of 3, if they were to ask you for the hypotenuse. Okay? So you just take the short leg and multiply it by 2 to get the hypotenuse. Alright, now that we've done 2 problems together, or now that we've done 2 problems, what questions do you have for me? Okay, let's do the next one together. Find the value of the variable, write your answer in simplest form. Okay, so first thing you need to do is fill in all the missing numbers. So you need to fill in this 4, this 4, this 2, and this 2. Anyone tell me what type of triangle we got here altogether? What type of triangle this black triangle is? Okay. Maybe let's see. Rayleigh, if each of these are 2, what's the length of this entire side? 4. Okay, so I have a black triangle here that this side's 4, this side's 4, and this side's 4. Now, could you tell me what type of triangle that is? If all 3 sides are 4?
Equilateral.
Equilateral. Okay, so if we know a triangle is equilateral where all 3 sides are the same, do I know what these angle measures are? What are they? 60. So this angle is 60, this angle is 60, and this entire angle is 60. If the entire angle is 60, what's each of these parts going to be? Say that again.
30.
30. They're each going to be 30. Oh, what do you know? I have a 30, 60, 90 triangle. So what I'm going to do is is I'm gonna redraw that triangle, but just the 30, 60, 90 triangle. I'm not gonna draw the entire triangle. I'm just gonna do half of it. So here's the 90, here's the 2, here's the 4, here's the H. This angle down here was 60 degrees, and this angle up here was 30. Okay, so I redrew this triangle, but without this side here. Now it's a 30, 60, 90, and we've got to find H. So the first thing you need to do is figure out, is H the short leg, the long leg, or the hypotenuse? Rayleigh, what would you say? This side here, H. Is it the short leg, the long leg, or the hypotenuse? The long leg, how did you know? Who can tell me? How can you know that that's the long leg?
It's across from the 60-degree angle.
It's across from a 60-degree angle, and the long leg is always across from a 60-degree angle because 30 is smaller than 60, so this side would be shorter than this side, and the hypotenuse is always across from the 90. All right, so Pelton, tell me, which formula am I going to use? Okay, well, I'm needing to find the long leg, so long equals short times the square root of 3, perfect. All right, Kyle, what am I going to plug in for the long leg?
H.
And Ivy, what am I going to plug in for the short leg? And then times the square root of 3. And then John, what's 2 times the square root of 3?
Maybe 2 square root.
Yeah, 2 square roots of 3.